Now it's time that we get into the meat of this look back. The whole point of the best of stop motion is to look at the most significant stop motion films out there, along with the people that made them. But the ones coming up are not only some of the most popular stop motion animated films, but some may argue that they're even some of the greatest in all of animation. Now let's start looking at some of these by looking at one of the most popular auteurs in Hollywood, known for his dark and twisted signature style, along with bringing some of his old friends into his movies. Now, he does have a pretty long history, along with a lot of big name movies out there, but we're only going to look at some of his animated works. This is the animation career of Tim Burton.
Tim Burton was born on August 25, 1958, in the suburbs of Burbank, California. Despite having a more dysfunctional family, he lived a more happy childhood, spending his time watching TV and monster movies, playing in the cemetery, like any normal kid would, and most importantly, drawing. Also, he would go and spend his time making movies, whether they be of stop-motion films with his action figures or feature some of the backyard kids in his neighborhood. At the age of 18, Tim attended Cal Arts, the art school founded by Walt Disney in the 60s, in order to study character animation. When he graduated in 1979, he created a few hand-drawn animated shorts, including Stalk of the Celery Monster. The short ended up doing so well that Disney offered him a 4-year apprenticeship at their animation studio, which he agreed to do. So technically, that would make Tim Burton the most popular Disney animator, even if his work there is not what made him famous. Anyways, during his stay at Disney, he had to work as an in-betweener, an assistant animator, and a concept artist on 3 different projects. The Fox and the Hound, where he had to work on Vixie and completely hated it because it was so boring to work on, Tron, where he was an animator, and The Black Cauldron, a project in which was more suited for Tim's style and created about 200 different concept arts for the movie, none of which was actually used in the final cut.
Well, this sucks.
Anyways, while he was at Disney, he made a deal with the company that they would fund 3 of his personal projects. There's the 1982 Vincent, a stop-motion short based on his own poem about a boy who thinks he's Vincent Price, which, by the way, is narrated by the guy himself, a Japanese-themed adaptation of the Brothers Grimm's Hansel and Gretel in 1983, and the 1984 Frankenweenie, which is about a boy who resurrects his dog from the dead. However, after making Frankenweenie, Disney ended up firing him for using their resources to make stuff that are considered too dark for their standards, says the company that would release this in theaters a year later. But even with that, Tim is not down and out. He decided to go bigger and heads out to make his first feature-length film, which he ended up doing, starting with the 1985 black comedy After Hours, but then decided to step down from the project after hearing that Martin Scorsese's wanted to do it. Okay, now what? Well, enter Paul Rubens, who saw his works like Vincent and Frankenweenie and decided to let him direct the movie based on his popular character, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. This would be the starting point for Tim that would lead him to make some of the biggest films of the late 80s and early 90s, including Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, and his Batman films. But it wouldn't be too long for Tim to return in the realm of animation with a project that he wanted to do for a long time. An idea where the world and the characters are already in Tim's imagination, just waiting to be burst out to the big screen. That project, of course, was The Nightmare Before Christmas. It's the story of Jack Skellington, who is tired of doing the same old song and dance routine of being the Pumpkin King of Halloween Town. So after a walk in the forest, he discovered some doors that lead to other holidays. One that really caught his eye, though, is the one that leads to Christmas Town. So through his amazing discovery, Jack decided that he'll be Santa this year, and he'll go out to spread his own Christmas joy to all the little boys and girls. The idea started all the way back when Tim was working at Disney. He saw this one store that has all this Halloween stuff taken down and replace it with Christmas decorations. This regular store change apparently sparked Tim's imagination. So after making Vincent, he wrote a 3-page poem called The Nightmare Before Christmas that was based on the story of a visit from St. Nicholas and holiday TV specials like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Interestingly though, the only characters in the poem are Jack, Zero, Santa, a hint of Shock, Lock, and Barrel, and some of the kids in the real world. After the success of Vincent, he thought of plans of turning his poem into either a children's book or a 30-minute TV special, already making some concept art and even storyboards for the project. But then 1984 came in where he got fired from Disney and moved on with his movie career, leaving the project more as an afterthought. It wasn't until 6 years later when Tim realized that Disney still has the film rights to the project. So he went up to the company and they said that they would let him turn this into a full-length feature film, hoping that it would have the same storytelling capabilities as Who Framed Roger Rabbit. For the songs, Tim went immediately to songwriter and composer Danny Elfman, who he met while working on Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Tim would just tell him about what's going on in a couple of scenes, then Danny would immediately go to work, writing each of the 10 songs for the film. In fact, he actually said that writing them was one of the easiest jobs he ever had, since he has a lot in common with Jack Skellington. So I guess you have those moments where you get bored of being a composer and want to be Santa instead? Well, actually I can see that happen. Anyways, Tim really wanted to direct the film, but because he had to work on Batman Returns and the pre-production of Ed Wood, he handed his directing job to a friend of his from Disney, Henry Selick. Apparently, he only had time to come in for about 8 to 10 days during the entire production. By the way, there was a bit of a controversy about this regarding whom does this film belong to. On one hand, Tim Burton thought up of the original idea, the story, and the characters. But then there's Henry Selick, who had to be in charge of making the whole movie. But as time moved on, the public ultimately decided that it's Tim's movie, since the title's heading is Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. Originally, Vincent Price was supposed to voice Santa, but unfortunately, due to his poor health after the passing of his wife, they decided to replace him with Ed Ivory. Also, Patrick Stewart did do the narration in the opening of the film, but wasn't used in the final cut. However, they did put his recording on the soundtrack of the film. The film took 3 years to make with over 120 different people working on it while filming 20 different scenes simultaneously. As for the puppets used in the film, they made over 200 of them with 3 or 4 each representing the same character. Even Jack himself had over 400 interchangeable heads that show a different emotion with a different mouth position on each. The movie was supposed to be released as part of its Disney animated feature lineup. Even its teaser trailer shows it as part of Disney's tradition of innovating the field of animation.
From the beginning, Walt Disney established a tradition of innovation. From the world's first full-length animated feature, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, to the new photographic techniques introduced in 101 Dalmatians, the combination of animation and live action in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and the dazzling use of computer technology in Beauty and the Beast. Now, Walt Disney Pictures is joining forces with Tim Burton, the creative genius behind Batman, Beetlejuice, and Edward Scissorhands, to bring you one of the most unique and innovative movies of our time, The Nightmare Before Christmas.
But then CEO of Disney, Michael Eisner, found that the movie was a little too scary for kids. So he decided to put it under the Touchstone Pictures banner, where Eisner usually puts his movies that are aimed more for adults. When it was released on October 29, 1993, it received critical acclaim from everyone, with critics loving its originality, creativity, and great use of stop-motion animation. As for the box office, it did do pretty well, making about $50 million domestically. It even got nominated for an Oscar for Best Visual Effects, a Golden Globe for Best Original Score, and won 2 Annies. In 2001, Disneyland, and then Tokyo Disneyland in 2004, has a special seasonal version of the Haunted Mansion called Haunted Mansion Holiday, where Jack comes into the place and spread around his Christmas cheer. Think of it more as a big crossover of the original attraction and The Nightmare Before Christmas. Also, Jack is no stranger to video games, where he has two of his own. The Pumpkin King for the Game Boy Advance, where it acts as a prequel to the film, and Oogie's Revenge for the PS2 and Xbox, where it acts as a sequel, both released in 2005. Not only that, but the characters also appear in the Kingdom Hearts games, where Halloween Town seems to be a fan favorite level, since it does reappear occasionally throughout the series, and Jack has his own figure for Disney Infinity. In 2006, the movie came back to theaters, but this time in Disney Digital 3D, and then re-released again in 2007, 2008, and 2010, increasing its domestic box office results from $50 to $75 million. Back in 2001, Disney originally wanted to make a sequel to the film, but this time with computer animation. However, Tim convinced them not to do it, since it's best for the movie to stay as it is. I mean, what else can they do with it? Is Jack gonna go invade Easter Town and become the Easter Bunny giving out man-eating eggs? But, as it is today, The Nightmare Before Christmas is beloved by audiences all around the world, as not only one of Disney's biggest franchises, but also deemed one of the greatest animated films of all times. After The Nightmare Before Christmas, Tim put his focus back more on directing and producing several live-action films, all of which showing his capabilities of taking any source material and able to adapt it to the big screen. This can range from a biography of the worst director who ever lived and turn it into Ed Wood, a science fiction trading card series and turn it into the all-star comedy that is Mars Attacks, or even turn a classic book into something like Sleepy Hollow, Big Fish, and his adaptation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But then it would be time for Tim to come back in the realm of stop-motion animation. However, unlike last time where he let someone else direct his work, he's putting himself in charge of Corpse Bride. Set in the 19th century in Europe, Victor was about to marry Victoria, whom he only met the day before the wedding. And by the way, the whole thing was arranged by their parents. It's not like they met like...
And you are?
Giselle.
Oh, Giselle! We shall be married in the morning.
Anyways, after Victor horribly screwed up during his wedding rehearsal, he decided to take a break in the woods and put Victoria's ring on a branch. Oh, wait, did I say branch? I mean he put the ring on the finger of an undead bride who takes him down to the netherworld. But now that he's down there with his new quote-unquote wife, he realized that Victoria is his true love and has to find a way to go back to his world. During the filming of The Nightmare Before Christmas, Pixar legend and storyboard artist of Nightmare, Joe Ranft, presented Tim a 19th century Russian folktale, which would be what this movie is based on and Joe would go produce. Similar to Nightmare, Burton was working on a couple of live-action films during the production of Corpse Bride. Since they began filming on November of 2003, it was during the time when he was finishing Big Fish and working on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. However, unlike Nightmare, he decided to simultaneously work on Charlie and Corpse Bride, while having a co-director, Mike Johnson, for the animated film. Originally, Albert Finney was supposed to play Grandpa Joe in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but when Tim came into the production, he replaced him with David Kelly. So to make things up for dear old Al, he decided to give him the part of Victoria's father, Finis Eveglot, a role that Sam Neill turned down. Speaking of Charlie, Tim wasn't the only one who had to work on these two films at the same time. While Johnny Depp was playing Willy Wonka in Charlie, he also had to voice Victor from Corpse Bride, which, by the way, is Johnny's first animated role. Ever since cinematographer Pete Kozachik finished his job on Monkey Bone, he always wanted to find a way to shoot stop-motion animated films digitally instead of traditionally with a 35mm camera. So after discussions with the crew 2 weeks before filming began, they decided to go ahead with his plan, making this the first movie that uses commercial digital still photography cameras with the Canon EOS 1D Mark II SLR with Nikon lenses. Available now at your local electronics department. Nikon lenses sold separately. Model may be obsolete by today's standards. During the 55 weeks they spent on filming this, unlike previous stop-motion films where they use replacement heads or mouths for the characters, the puppets had special clockwork heads controlled by hidden keys to give the movements more subtlety. However, this also makes it even harder for the animators, like as if stop-motion alone isn't difficult enough. Even one guy had nightmares about adjusting his own facial expressions that way. Speaking of the puppets, they made several of the same characters, but even more than in Nightmare. It's been said that the main characters, Victor, the bride, and Victoria, had about 13 to 14 puppets each. Unfortunately, in the summer of 2005, Joe Ranft passed away in a car accident. This film, along with Pixar's Cars, has been dedicated to him. When it was released on September 23, 2005, it ended up as a decent hit. Critics gave it positive reviews, saying that, as can be expected from a Tim Burton movie, Corpse Bride is whimsically macabre, visually imaginative, and emotionally bittersweet. As for the box office, it did do decently well with $53 million domestically and $117 million worldwide. This movie would go on to get a special UB Iwerks Award for Technical Achievement at the Annie Awards and was nominated for an Oscar for Best Animated Feature alongside Studio Ghibli's Howl's Moving Castle, but lost to Aardman's Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. By the way, take a good look at this. There's a really good chance that this will be the first and last time you'll ever see the Best Animated Feature category to not have a single computer animated film nominated. Like last time, Tim took a little break from animation and direct and produce a few more feature films. Some are great, some are bad, some are scary, some are weird, some make a crap ton of money, and some bring back old memories like Frankenweenie. It's about Victor, whose dog, Sparky, unfortunately got run over by a car. It was pretty tough for him to deal with the fact that his best friend is gone, but he decided not to and brought him back from the grave. But then his classmates come in to try to copy Victor with their pets, which causes major chaos in the town of New Holland. As you may remember in the beginning of Tim Burton's career, Frankenweenie began as a 1984 live-action short that mainly focuses on Victor and Sparky. It wasn't until much later in late 2005 where Tim decided to remake the short into a full-length animated feature film. A year later, writer John August was asked if he could rewrite the script, but wasn't hired to do so until 2009. What's interesting to note about this film is that this is Tim's first movie since Big Fish where Johnny Depp's not in it, and the first since Sleepy Hollow where he didn't even bring in Helena Bonham Carter. The filming began on July 2010 at 3 Mills Studios in London, the same place and people that made Corpse Bride, and the crew was making 30 different scenes simultaneously. For Sparky, his design was borrowed heavily from another dog he worked on, the family dog from Family Dog. As for his puppets, they were pretty tricky to create, since they have to make him more dog-sized compared to the human characters, but not too small so that he can be controllable. Also, where human characters have around 40 to 45 joints in their armature, Sparky has around like 300. Even I didn't even know dogs are able to move around differently more than humans, especially when most of the time they just lay around like a rug. Anyways, this movie is actually Tim Burton's biggest homage to the horror movies of the 1920s up to the 1980s, with the characters themselves being a reference to the icons of that genre. Some of these include Mr. Rizuski looking a lot like Vincent Price, Nazor looking like Boris Karloff as Frankenstein's monster with his hamster mummy, which in the classic film was also played by Karloff. Edgar is obviously Igor from Son of Frankenstein, played by Bela Lugosi, while his pet rat turns into the Wolfman. Toshiaki's turtle, Shelly, is inspired by the Japanese giant monster movies, specifically Gamera, and Bob's sea monkeys are an homage to the Gremlins. There are even some characters that were based off of other works, like Mr. Burgermeister was influenced by the villain of Santa Claus is Coming to Town, Burgermeister Meisterburger, and the Weird Girl is actually a character that came directly from Tim's 1997 book, The Melancholy Death of Oyster Boy and Other Stories. After the film was released, fans have been speculating a theory that connects all of Tim's stop-motion films into one big story about a man and his undead dog. It starts out with Victor and Sparky in Frankenweenie, then Victor would grow older and find Sparky as now Scraps in Corpse Bride, and then much later, Victor would be a part of the undead now as Jack Skellington with his dog now called Zero. But hey, that's just a theory. An animated theory. Tune in next time and I'll show you how Tarzan could be the long-lost brother of Anna and Elsa by connecting Frozen, Tarzan, Tangled, and The Little Mermaid. Thanks for watching. When it was out on October 5th, 2012, the movie went great with the critics, saying that Frankenweenie is an energetic stop-motion horror movie spoof with lovingly crafted visuals and a heartfelt oddball story. As for the box office, it kind of flunked, making only more than $80 million worldwide. The reason why it didn't do so well was because of competition with another animated film that features some Universal monsters, Hotel Transylvania. In other words, instead of going out to see Tim Burton's artistically big love letter to the classic horror films, audiences rather want to watch...
Check it out, I'm a Franken homie.
I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
But, unlike the crappy Sony film, Frankenweenie went on to get an Oscar nomination for Best Animated Feature, alongside Aardman's The Pirates Band of Misfits. Sparky would also get his own tombstone in the Pet Cemetery whenever the Haunted Mansion holidays come around, and even has his own short called Captain Sparky vs. the Flying Saucers, which is a little movie Victor made starring his dog.
Even if he only made a few animated projects, his filmmaking and art style has now been considered so iconic that there is a word for it. Nowadays, people take pride and even consider it a compliment whenever their art style or filmmaking skills are considered Burtonesque.